Hello students, this is Mr. Nason, and I'm sorry I can't be there today, but I hope to be back by Monday. Today, you've already taken your quiz for the day, and I'm going to give you the beginning of worldview analysis, what it is to evaluate a worldview. So how do you evaluate a worldview and understand the vocabulary that goes along with beginning to evaluate worldviews? The vocabulary is going to be important because it'll help us distinguish exactly what people mean when they use the word worldview. Because worldview is a broad term, and it can encapsulate a whole bunch of things. And so we specify and use the vocabulary so that we can make sure we have exactly what the person is talking about. And I'm sure as we start working through, you'll see this. So a piece of paper and a pencil or typing this into a computer is necessary. You'll eventually be turning this in over the weekend into Google Classroom. And so please take notes as you go, translate them into a Word document, and they will go into a Google Classroom assignment for the day. Okay? So worldview analysis, what does it look like? Well, it starts with the vocabulary. Vocabulary when considering worldview analysis. What it is do I mean exactly by worldview? And there's 10 different things I could mean when I say worldview. The actual worldview. The actual worldview is a view of the world that corresponds rightly to reality. Now, nobody probably holds this. There's probably nobody in the world that holds exactly to what is actually the world. In other words, our thinking about the world is diminished in some way. We don't understand something about the world. Atheists will tell you that they don't understand all that there is about the world, and a Christian should tell you they're not sure about everything that is in the world. There are huge guiding principles that help guide their worldview, but there is an actual view of the world that is correct, because there can only be one world that we actually live in. There's not going to be different kinds of worlds. Even in the idea of a multi-universe, each universe is uniquely that universe. There may be a different universe that has different things going on in it, but this one is one. And so what we mean by the actual worldview is the actual world that we live in. So it's the view of the world that corresponds rightly to our reality. And then you have a personal worldview. This is the second definition. A personal worldview is a view of the world held by an individual. It's a unique to that person worldview. Everybody has a different perspective. Everybody sees the world a little bit differently. Some people, we talked about Asher going to Pakistan and bringing that into his mind when he's considering the world. Some people have been to Europe, some people have traveled all over the world, and they're bringing all of that information into their mind when they're considering what the worldview is that they hold about the world. And so our worldview is going to be unique to us as thinking individuals. And then there's a cultural worldview. Cultural worldview is a view of the world held by a group of people. And so there are broad things that we can agree on. This is family, community, theological or philosophical schools. Everybody's going to have a unique, in their own perspective, way of looking at the world. But in a community, in a cultural worldview, what they've decided is there are main things that they hold. If you claim to be an atheist, then you are in the culture of having an atheistic worldview. And there are certain agreed upon assumptions about the world, and you operate in there. But not all atheists agree. And so there's differences within that cultural worldview. But there are agreed upon things within that culture. Christianity would be another one that has some agreed upon things for their worldview, but yet Christians can disagree within that. So a cultural worldview is just a worldview held by a specific group of people. Professed worldview is a view of the world a person claims to hold. So in other words, it's what I tell other people, this is what I think about the world. Some people would say they're atheistic. Some people would say they're theistic. Some people maybe deistic. Some people maybe say that I don't know exactly what I am. So I'm not trying to claim a worldview. But that doesn't, there is a profession that I'm giving about the world. Now, my profession may not be how I live. So there's an idea of a functional worldview. I've said this before, there are practical atheists in the Christian community. And what I mean by that is they claim a Christian worldview. They claim Jesus is rose from the dead. They claim that proves him to be God. They claim that proves that what he said in Scripture is true. And yet they don't pray. That they don't believe in maybe the devil or spirits or a spiritual warfare that is going on. They live as if those things don't exist. They don't operate within their profession of a worldview. In other words, they live in a different way. And so when you function in life different than what you profess, that is your functional worldview. Or maybe you function in the world exactly how you profess. And so I profess one thing and I function in the world as if that thing is true. So there's a profession, what I say, and there's a function in how I live. And so those are important to distinguish between when we talk about worldview as well. Philosophical worldview, we mentioned this in class before. But philosophy is man beginning with his own mind and reason and logic and those kinds of things. And so a philosophical worldview is a view of the world originating from the mind of a person that excludes divine revelation. So in other words, they're not using Scripture or anything that God has said at the beginning of establishing their worldview. They're only using reason. And Plato and Aristotle are examples of this, and other philosophers who have followed. But Plato and Aristotle reasoned from the mind of man, but came to the belief that there was a God. They came to the belief that there was an unmoved mover in the world. And so they began the reasoning process from their own mind, landing on the idea that there's a God, but none of that came from divine revelation. It only came from their mind. And so that's a philosophical worldview. A theological worldview is a view of the world offered by a religious viewpoint from divine revelation. In other words, this is Christianity claiming that the 66 books of the Bible are divine revelation. This is what God has said to us. And so we try to live in the world from that perspective. We develop a view of the world from what God has said. That is a theological worldview. Christianity is not the only one that does that. Islam does that as well. The Jews would do that as well. And others that claim a divine revelation would do that. Islam, Christian. And this separates even some Protestants and Catholics or Reformed and Arminian Protestants. I mean, it really does separate out. Your theological worldview is what you hold to as your beginning of developing a worldview. Then you have a theoretical view of the world, a theoretical worldview. This is a view of the world that you offer up for evaluation. So I'm a Christian. I would say I hold to a Christian worldview. And so here's my view of the world. Let's evaluate it. Let's take it as theoretical. So let's take it, assume that all the facts in it are true, and now evaluate it based on itself. So a theoretical worldview is just the world that you offer, the worldview you offer somebody to say, evaluate this worldview, see if it makes any sense. And then an unsubstantiated worldview, unsubstantiated, or you might just say unproven worldview. This is a view of the world that has not been evaluated. or it has failed the evaluation process. So if I haven't evaluated my worldview, then I have an unsubstantiated worldview. If I haven't looked at it to make sure that it's consistent and all the stuff that we'll do in the analysis process, if I haven't done that, then I don't know if it's true. I have an unsubstantiated worldview, an unproven worldview. And then we, of course, have a proven worldview. That is a worldview that has passed the evaluation process. It's passed it. So you go through these steps of evaluation and see if this worldview actually holds true. So those 10 vocabulary. So basically we've stuck a word on the front of worldview so we can distinguish between what we're talking about when we mention worldview. Because worldview can mean any of those things. But when we stick a word on the front of it, it helps us to differentiate between the ways somebody might be talking about their worldview. And so now we have a vocabulary we can use when we're talking to other people about worldviews. So worldview analysis, there's 4 steps, only 4 steps in this process. Number 1 is internal consistency. Internal consistency. And that is, do the beliefs of a worldview logically infer the other beliefs of that worldview? In other words, we're talking about several different beliefs under a Christian worldview, right? Jesus is ultimate reality. Jesus is external reality, as he is the creator God who creates it. Jesus and humanity. So how does Jesus relate to humanity? So can all of the worldview beliefs, those 7 that we're going to be talking about, can they be logically inferred from all of the other ones? So in other words, can I start with one of them and get to all the rest? Do they logically make sense? Are they consistent with one another? Some might even say, do they entail one another? That is internal consistency. In other words, I'm evaluating that worldview based on its own profession of what it says it is. Does that make sense? I hope that does. Internal consistency. The second test is a unified analysis. Unified analysis over a spectrum of different ways of things that we find in the world. Does the worldview allow for history we know and scientific method we use, logic that we use in both of those? I mean, there's several different things. In other words, is this worldview consistent with the other sciences of the world? In other words, does archaeology confirm your worldview? Do the things that you find in history corroborate the things that you find in your worldview? Does geology, does astrology, does any of that confirm what it is that you see in your worldview? That is another way to have an analysis of your worldview. Another one is explanatory power for experience. Explanatory power for experience. In other words, does the worldview consistently relate to the world we live in? Do you see people living in a way that is consistent with what your worldview would expect a world to be if it were true? In other words, if your worldview is the true worldview, does it match what you see in the world around you? Does the daily news, is it understandable with your worldview being true? If it doesn't have explanatory power for the experience that we have in the world, then it's a worldview that fails that test. Is it consistent with what we experience in the world? And then the last one is it livable? This is almost like the last one, but a little bit different. This is more personal. Can the worldview be lived out consistently? Can I believe what I believe about my world and actually live in it consistently with what I say I believe about the world. If you can do those 4 things, if you show in those 4 different ways that your worldview is, well, let's just go back and look. Is your worldview internally consistent? Is your worldview unified in analysis? Is your worldview have explanatory power for experiences in the world? And does your worldview, is it livable for you? If you say yes to each of those, then you have passed the test of a worldview analysis. If you are somewhere hung up in one of those, then you have an unsubstantiated worldview. Unsubstantiated worldview. Well, this is how you evaluate a worldview and understand the vocabulary when you're talking about that. So students, you'll need to have those definitions and those 4 steps with the definitions of those 4 steps and the definitions of those worldview vocabulary words. You'll have to have those in a document uploaded to Google Classroom before Monday. Okay? So have a great day for the rest of the day, and hopefully you can get that finished before the class is over. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Bye-bye.